We will work with writers of all levels. It's not just about people who have had a tremendous amount of experience producing television.
Wow, that explains a lot.
But the thing that is essential is to have someone who has an incredible take on a world.
Right, but the world was already established. An incredible take on a world that's already established. It's very, very hard, especially if it just causes division and confusion.
Beyond just a pilot, beyond just a season, they have a passion and a calling to tell this particular story.
But are they telling that story well? Are they?
Evil is coming, but nobody else feels that. So she's kind of in her own horror film to a degree. She's like, believe me.
It would happen, and it was. It's middle happen, and it was. It's middle.
So Vernon Sanders had some interesting things to say, and basically, a lot of what he said seemed to be that everything was planned, that they were very successful, and they listened to actual feedback from the fans. I don't know about that. So this is from a Deadline article that I'll attempt to link when I finish the vid. So The Lord of the Rings of Power started setting records before a frame of it had been released when word came out of New Zealand last year that its 8th episode first season cost a record $465 million to produce, not factoring in tax rebates and startup costs, amortization. So first off, my only issue is that I don't know what happened to the $1 billion number, because I thought it was $1 billion, and then now it's like 465 million. So he goes on to say, in an interview with Deadline, Vernon Sanders, head of global TV for Amazon Studios, says the financial bet has more than paid off. So the financial bet paid off, but how did it pay off? Was your viewership like 500 million? Was your viewership like 1 billion worldwide? How did it pay off exactly? He addresses the success of the show on Prime Video, where it broke records for most global viewers in its first day, 25 million, and overall more than 100 million, for minutes streamed, 24 billion. And signups worldwide during its launch window attracted younger viewers, record numbers of adults 18 to 34 for a Prime Video original, and affluent audiences, 40%, coming from households with income greater than 100,000 and beyond, boosting Amazon sales of J.R.R. Tolkien books on which the series was based. So Deadline asks Sanders this question: how would you evaluate the performance of The Rings of Power? Sanders, has been a tremendous success for us. It's performed incredibly well around the globe. It is by far our biggest scripted series. It is the most acquisitive show that we've put out. After we finished releasing episodes, we saw a new surge of people come to the service to start the show. We've already released the fact that we're over 100 million, and the number has gone up since then. It's millions and millions beyond that. We are really, really proud that the show drove renewed interest in the books. We saw spikes in book sales. It's just been a company-wide success. And as significant as our investment has been, it has more than paid off. So one of the interesting things that Mr. Sanders mentioned, that there was this powerful interest in the books and that they sold a lot of Tolkien books. And of course, as we all know, Amazon originally started out as a bookseller. But I'm just kind of curious why they didn't share those numbers around the books. Was it in the millions of dollars? Was it in the billions of dollars? Was it necessarily the same people who were watching The Rings of Power, or was it a separate group? Deadline asked him, Rings of Power received an early Season 2 renewal in late 2019. Now that Season 1 is out, are you still committed to Patrick and JD's vision of telling the story over 5 seasons? And if so, when can we expect a Season 3 renewal? So Sanders said, we are absolutely committed. We have every reason to be excited. They've done a tremendous job. It's a great question about Season 3. We're probably 2 to 3 months in on Season 3, but I think there could be news certainly in the new year. There's so much planning and prep that's necessary for us to get this mounted, that the only reason we probably haven't gotten there quite yet is we've just been so heads down in season 2. But I would expect there to be news in the new year. So there's no real mention of Galadriel or anything as far as her character developing in a new way, or whether her husband's going to show up in season 2. No mention of that. There is mention of ring bearers that are going to be dwarf kings. There is mention of the Nazgul being introduced. It was good, though, that he talked about the Molly situation with Adar. But to be quite honest, Hazelden, I don't really think he can really fit the shoes of Adar like Molly could, but that remains to be seen. And then the diversity question. So they've expanded diversity, and it just really sort of like feels like a shield for them to hide behind, to be quite honest. I'm still wondering, and it's been brought up on my channel before, like why they didn't use the diversity more in the way that Tolkien structured it. Like the men of the East could be quote-unquote men of color, and then they could even introduce like offshoots of the elves in another region. And the reasoning for the diversity, according to Sanders, is that we hire all over. So the gist of the article is really the following. And we at Amazon, because we have a bunch of other projects that are really successful that we're going to release at the same time, we're really not so much concerned about what happens just with this one show, because we're going to put out a bunch of other content. That was one of the first things I could take away from the interview. Other things that I really took away from the interview are that we're just going to give you a bunch more action. We're not going to really do better writing. We're not going to do better writing necessarily, because I didn't really hear any of that. But I did hear we're going to speed up the pacing, and we're going to have better action sequences, which really has nothing to do with tying it more into the lore. So yeah, there was a mention about the appendices in the books, but there really was no mention about how fundamentally a lot of the stuff that they did in the Rings of Power, especially with some of the chief characters that are well established, has nothing to do with Tolkien whatsoever. So they're not going to explain why Gandalf fell from the sky. They're not going to explain why the Twisted Sisters thought that he was Sauron. They're not going to explain why the Harfoots are dirty, or why Gandalf looks like a homeless man. They're not going to explain that. They just want us to run with that and accept that. They didn't really explain that. They're not going to explain that, you know, going back to Gandalf, the idea that Gandalf remotely embodies evil is ludicrous in of itself. It's really like a poison pen, and it's a dumb idea to have introduced. Now, the Stranger as a character in the Rings of Power was a character that I actually personally enjoyed, but the idea that he was dirty and feeble and amnesiac or had amnesia, it just really didn't work, and it doesn't really foster the Amazon brand. And it takes away from not just the Amazon brand, of course, it takes away from the Tolkien brand. And then going back to really specific what Sanders was saying, he didn't really explain any of that stuff. He just said that basically we're going to have more action. And he also didn't explain, like, why did we have a Galadriel that we ended up having? Why is she the way she is? Why is she basically a better fighter than Jet Li and Bruce Lee put together? That doesn't make any sense. But we have to suspend belief and just accept it because, yeah, I said so, or because I'm not going to address it. Now, maybe I'm going too hard on Mr. Sanders, but most of his answers were very political, and which makes sense because he's an exec and he doesn't want to put himself in harm's way. He doesn't want to put Amazon in harm's way, but he didn't really answer very much of anything.
The second thing that's really most important is to know your buyer as well as you can.